Members of the board, this is simply a discussion this evening. We have received an application. Miles, sorry to make you rush. I'll take a breath. Kelly, thank you for the correction. I'm so sorry. Would you lead us in a Miles, you're very loved. But I am going to let you turn that towards the board so you're speaking to the board. Thank you. Kelly, my misstep was to move past consent agenda without a vote. Is that correct?
Do you want this one?
Thank you. My fault. I'm so sorry.
Do I have a motion to accept the consent calendar?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Kelly, roll call vote, please.
Austin. Brabetto.
Yes.
Illingworth.
Aye.
Patterson. Aye. Rusterholz.
Aye. Now,
Sorry, members of the board. I got
we
excited.
will move on to number 7.
Mr. Tuttle, would you kind of describe why we're here this evening on this topic?
Yeah, so there, as we look at Colorado revised statutes and the process of looking at charter schools and facility use, one intermediate step that we realize that we need to go through is any charter schools wanting to use facilities need to go through an application process for facility use. There's not much of a template out there that we can find, so we've started that process. And so we have a charter application for facility use. It's a kind of a general application that outlines purpose, the organization, need as far as rooms and spaces requested, any services requested. It kind of spells out those things, and then that's kind of like I said, a step before proceeding any further with looking at spaces.
So, members of the board, Miles is just kind of the gatekeeper on this project. He is the operations director in charge of facilities, and so he's gone through the process, and Mr. Miller has advised on kind of the legalities of things. Now that we have an application, there's a little bit of a parallel process going on right now, and I think it's very evident to everybody in the community that we've got a facilities rental request that is completely separate from the contract of Merit. Now, Merit is approved as a charter school. They are not contracted yet with us, and so at this point, the timeline would be something like 30 to 45 days in order to conclude a lease type agreement. It is anticipated that during that time that Miles and his team would begin working on finding a facility. Yes, there have been lots of discussions about using the middle school in light of the K-12 nature of Merit. That decision has not been made, and that decision can be advised if the board, from a variety of stakeholders, just it kind of depends on where the board would like to go. I'm open to hearing guidance, thoughts from the board. This could be as simple as we've received an application and come back in a month and tell you what we think in a more formal way. And I say a month, but it would take some time to get the lease arrangement pulled together. And so that's, I guess, the delay here is the legalities. At least we've never leased one of our buildings like this before in a shared arrangement. And so we have spent quite a bit of time in the last 10 days looking at lease arrangements with other districts and shared school arrangements with exemplars like Denver Public Schools and D20 and D11. Miles has spent a lot of time on this. And so thank you for just jumping straight on in. Once we receive notification that the school is requesting one of our facilities, we have to go through that due diligence. This is very different than the cooperative strategies process. So I am going to allow Miles just to speak just a second on that so that we understand kind of what that process is, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, and cooperative strategies is aware of some of the things that are happening and possibilities with leasing part or whole or all of a building. So they're well aware as they build that into their facility master plan. So depending on what happens with all this, I mean, we will make sure that a 10-year, like a 1, 2, 5, 10-year planning process that we go through with facility master planning would consider any of these options as well. The facility master planning process is still going on as scheduled. We have meetings scheduled with the steering committee. We have, and then we'll have a final plan by the end of June that we'll look at next year and beyond. In some ways, this kind of sits outside of this because there are a lot of unknowns, but just know that if a facility is utilized for charter school operations, then they would still adhere to facility master planning as it looks at the district as a whole, regardless of what schools operate in the district.
And for the sake of transparency, I want to reiterate a couple things that I did communicate in our last work session. I would not advise the board in leasing to own a property. That's just my own opinion. I think that the future is bright for WPSD, but we don't know what the future holds. And so going through the process of giving analysis to which facilities might make sense, I'll just tell you kind of from my experience, I don't see an elementary school as maybe was once described as an ideal location for merit, simply because of the middle school, high school requirements. And so that really begins limiting space that are science labs, that are art facilities, chemical storage, those type of career and tech ed, that really limits us to only 2 buildings in the district that are scaled to fit that without major modification expense, and that would be the middle school, and that would be the high school. And so Miles will spend the time with engineers and folks talking about how that could happen. The reality is, if we're going to open a school next year in a shared type arrangement, it's going to take some effort. And that probably cannot wait until June with the facilities master plan. And so a 6-week window, 8-week window in the summer to make any modifications to that building is too short of a period of time. And so if we're looking at a shared school facility, we would need to start allowing those students, or at least the administration of the school, to begin moving in during the month of July, maybe as early as June, as soon as our school closed and we were able to make those modifications. So a shared school facility requires a partnership between both the leasing organization as well as the school district. I'm trying to provide Miles and his facilities team as much time as possible, while also doing the appropriate diligence to make sure this makes sense. Miles, I know that we've talked about the middle school. I know we have a lot of folks in the audience that may have questions about this. I don't know that now is the best time to necessarily go through those, but is there any objections or dispelling? You want to talk a little bit about the baby step initial thought on the middle school? I mean, are we going to be raising class sizes?
We are looking at, we haven't looked at how it would impact the middle school itself. We're looking at, and this charter application is looking at facility, it's looking at.
Hold on a second. I'm going to defend Miles just a little bit. He's had about 8 days with this. Okay, so he texted me right before we got up here. He said, "Sir, would you kind of defend me a little bit?" I said, "Yes." Miles has had about 8 days with this, and so I'm putting him on the spot a little bit to say, where are we in this process? Not say that we are not going to. It's just to say, I'm trying to be as transparent as we can of where we are currently in this process.
Yeah,
Protection. Do I get a plus?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of things to consider, and even looking through what a facility use agreement would look like. It's given us the scope of all that. It's going to be a 100+ page document, regardless of what any of this looks like, as we consider all of the things that it would impact. It would, of course, impact class size and utilization, and it have effects on how programs are carried out in both schools. So that's not what this charter application for facility use is about. It's a proposal on needs as far as classroom needs or requests, and other things as far as like access to other facilities, things like parking and stuff like that. It's what the application is really all about. Then we look at that and assess, what facilities might be available or partial facilities would be available But at this point, the application is a request from Merit Academy on what they would like as far as facilities goes.
And again, to reiterate, this is a separate process in the contracting procedure and will be kept separate from the contracting procedure to establish Merit as a contractual relationship with the district as a chartering authority. So this is a lease agreement, probably a multi-year, but not an extensive, 5-10 year. It's just with any business type arrangement, we want to make sure that they've got enough runway and that we have enough runway as well to be successful if that's what we choose to do. Members of the board, I'm going to open it up for questions or punt until Miles can come back at a later date with maybe a more specific report. It's up to you.
Superintendent, I think I heard Miles say there's some sort of statute or something involved in this. There's a law that says like a charter school has to submit an application to an authorizing district.
Right. I'll happy to try to pull off my non-legal opinion. Brad, please correct me if I overstep. But as of, and Brian Gustafson is in the room as well. He spent quite a bit of time with Miles and I working on this week. Once Merit is chartered by the district, they become a district charter school. We then enter into a category called a chartering authority. So we have a charter school within our district. We therefore have a chartering authority responsibility. Once we have that chartering authority responsibility, we must submit to a charter school or any other charter type organization, I guess it would be charter school, every November, what our available space is. Available space is not limited to an entire vacant school, but it's limited, or it's described in statute as what? Underutilized, unused, or underutilized space. So at that point, the charter school could apply for any of our unutilized space, and we would be required by law to provide that as a description to them of what the seat capacity or what that unutilized space would be. In effect, by next November, Merit would have to be notified that they have we have an available space. They then could apply for it for fall of 23. So there is not an avoidance of that. We would have to provide that according to the statute of that information. It doesn't, and I have to be careful here, Brad, it doesn't mean that we have to go out and rent it to them, but it does mean that we have to advertise it and let them know what it is. I think the having to rent and not having to rent is more of a business decision or a fiduciary decision of the board. And statute does describe that I, in this case, cannot sign the lease on behalf of a charter school. I can sign just about every other lease and facility use agreement, as Miles and I do. But the charter school is specifically called out in statute as needing the board to sign off on that lease.
Okay. So, but generally, the law requires us to at least notify a charter
Correct.
school if there is space available. So they, it sounds like, could have an opportunity to
Apply.
bid on it or something like that.
That's correct.
Okay. And Dr. Neal, have you had experience doing this sort of thing in your career?
Yeah, that's a setup question.
Maybe not in Middle East, but maybe in Denver?
Well, I would tell you in the years that I was in Denver Public Schools, there was a lot of success in sharing schools rather than closing schools. And I was a part of that process. Manual High School is an example, and we've looked at the lease for Manual High School. It was a 3,600 student high school divided into 3 separate floors, and we had 3 separate schools in that high school. Main floor, second floor, third floor. So shared schools, shared facilities. I've seen it work very well. Yvonne and Aaron are the middle school leaders at that school here. We've had some discussions about that, and they've been exemplary, as well as the staff there, at least talking about this as a concept. I know that Yvonne came in on a Saturday and spent an extensive amount of time talking about what rooms could be available, what doorways could be available, how they could access, what parking lots could be available. All of those are just preliminary discussions, but looking at that middle school compared to any of our other facilities, it is possible, although not easy. There's still some expense, to closing off corridors. One of the questions that came up earlier is elementary kids commingling with middle school kids. I think what we were able to look at is an ability for the school to be completely separate, no interactions between the schools, coming in and out, entrance and egress out of the building without interacting with each school. And so there was some traction on that discussion rather than sharing any one of the other schools in the district. Quite frankly, the attitude was, I don't want to displace any of the teachers or students at any other school. And so when I looked at some of the other discussions specific about Columbine, I'm not comfortable with closing a school for the sake of a charter school, really in its second year. And so that makes it, thank you. It's a long-term relationship with the charter school. Right. And I think in that long-term relationship, as the school grows, and some discussion this evening of where we're going to put all the kids, the pie is the pie, what I say is, and so the numbers of students in our district is really probably going to remain the same. We may pick up some students from Manitou or another school district, but for the most part, the birth rate in the district is declining, and we will continue to see depending on cooperative strategy studies, but we will continue to see a declining enrollment. So that's kind of a long way to say we've spent some time theorizing about this, looking at spaces, talking with Merit. We did have some representatives from Merit look at the space, talk about the appropriateness of a middle school rather than an elementary school. And so quite frankly, personally, I don't have any interest in further discussions on the topic of one of our elementary schools because this begins to really make sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talked about that obviously if they were to move into an elementary school, you would see a lot of student and staff displacement. Do you foresee that being a major issue if Merit were to move into the middle school?
I actually see no student or staff displacement if they moved into the middle school.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I think that should
So all
be
staff would
absolutely-
remain, keep their jobs, all students would remain, even the world's greatest sixth grader, while she would be down the hall from where she is now. There was that strong consideration for the space.
Yeah, I mean, that would have to be an absolute high priority. We want to treat all our kids equally. And we absolutely would not want to inconvenience, much less cause disruption by having to have staff move from one school to another or something like that. So I knew you would be making sure that was the case.
Well, the disruption would be for, if we did have a shared facility, we would rework the school, and that's going to be a pain for teachers to move classrooms. And so we want to be very sensitive about that. Sure. And we don't want to be doing it every year. So 21 classrooms this year, 23 classrooms. I mean, there's a balance to making sure we get it right the first time. And then watching and seeing, Merit needs to be successful on their own. And if, they have a school, then I guess I've seen charter schools succeed or fail on their own.
Sure.
And that is Merit's responsibility, not ours. They have their own school board. They have their own enrollment procedures. The thing that we would be working on would be who clears the snow, right? How do we do internet? How do we do speaker systems? How do we do video conference systems, or video security systems? What do we do when we have a fire drill, right? Those are things that ends up being commingled between schools. And Mr. Goings, as well as Mrs. Goings and other folks in the room were in that initial conversation about what does a shared school facility do for us? Number one, it makes sure that no student in the Woodland Park School District is displaced and no staff member. So trying to find a happy medium here.
And if I understand it, based on the way you were talking about the law, that the middle school is currently underutilized as that term is used in the law?
That's correct.
Okay, so it looks like we have the space available.
Miles, my understanding in looking at that, we would not need to be taking classes away from current students to move the middle school, to move Merit in there. It would be the same numbers of classes, class sizes would not be going up, that teacher responsibilities would not be doubling up because we removed teachers from that. My understanding, and again, this is part of that research process over the next period of time, it would be a consolidation and moving into one area. Mm-hmm. With the exception of the PE area where there would be a large curtain put between the
yeah, there are currently 2 gyms, and so
right.
we were looking at options for splitting one of the gyms so that it could be used with two PE classes, but have it so that it could be opened up as one gym as well.
And then the facility master planning process will give us a 1, 3, 5, and 10-year plan for the other facilities in the district. And so we do have space here at the high school. At some point, we need to begin looking at it. What are the options? And that's part of the community listening process that we're going through right now. Do we have Pikes Peak Community College come in? Do we do a career and tech ed center? Do we do a STEM extension? There's other things to be done with our facilities, but this is just a little bit out of necessity, I think, in Merit's part, but it's a little bit out of step of our strategic planning for facilities. And so we're trying to navigate that.
And Matthew, do you have sort of a sense of what the capacity for students is at the middle school?
There's kind of two attitudes on that. There is a fire code, numbers of kids in a classroom number, and then there is the reality of how we use the space. So one of the conversations tonight was the special education rooms would not be ADA accessible. That would not be appropriate for any kind of a move. We would not be stopping our special education families and team of teachers to support our special education students there. And so we really need to approach this as a do no harm concept. And if we can't do it, then I need to be able to come back to the board in full transparency and say, this would do harm to so-and-so type. At this point, the most difficult part is sharing of the gym. It's a fairly large space, but it means that combined classrooms on either side of the gym curtain would be caused. But as far as total capacity, the building would not be over capacity according to fire code. The study right now will need to be, would it be uncomfortable in any way for the two schools as far as capacity? We're not seeing a level of discomfort right now. Merit would not be using the cafeteria. Merit would not be using the tech shed, the recycling type area. Merit would not be using
Library.
the library or the band room or the art room. There's a section of the school that would be carved off and said, Merit, this is your responsibility to make it what it is. And I think staff in the meeting that we had were very transparent about talking about wait a second, we don't want to do that. Or, and Tina brought up the opportunity for some STEM lab improvements and some reworking of things inside to benefit our students, that while we're moving, we might as well add some technology and resources as well. Did I leave that out? Anything else?
No, I think those are the biggies. And like Dr. Neal said, this is out of the normal timeline of our facilities master planning. So it does complicate a lot of that, but in the meantime, we are looking at if this is a space that ends up being a shared space, we want to maximize the space that the middle school ends up using with maybe some innovative spaces. We talked about a computer lab that has some other things built into it as well. And just while we're moving things around, look at improvements that could be made in the meantime as well, so that we can really maximize the space that is utilized.
And then Merit would be paying the school district for the use of the facility?
Merit would be responsible to pay for the upkeep, maintenance, facility, some level of facility depreciation. It gets a little complicated. The district legally cannot charge rent to Merit on that. It's actually called out in statute that way. The law says once we charter them, we cannot charge them rent. But really what it looks like is a reimbursement for expenditures the district would have for having them in the building.
Like a cost sharing.
A cost share.
Expenses.
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah, some
Okay.
things would be a cost share model, likely. Some would be the district would take on and then bill a portion of, and then other things would be stipulated as like a charter school would be responsible for certain things and all the costs associated with it. But that's part of a pretty extensive lease that we'd have to put together. It's quite a document.
Miles illustrated it. The leases we've looked at are more than 100 pages. It's a fairly extensive process to make sure that that's very clear before we get started. And so that's the due diligence that's happening right now, regardless of what facility.
But we're not talking about selling it to them or giving it to them.
That's correct. I would have zero interest in doing either one of those activities.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Miles.
Other questions from the
Any other
board?
questions?
I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Chris?
Make sure that I'm clear.
you
There we go. On this, that the lease conversation does not enter the contract, is that correct?
That's correct.
So if there was a lease, it would be with a stipulation that they would have to obviously the contract would have to be in place for that lease to actually follow through.
It wouldn't have to be, but it would be ideal if it would. And we kind of see those, I think, landing about the same time.
Yeah, because if they're not contracted.
There's
and
no
they-
reason to lease
And
the
they
building.
remain a contract school, then we're not obligated to lease them that space.
That's correct.
And so, in the spirit of transparency, am I correct in hearing that, like, Merritt has the need? Like, they don't have a space for next fall, is that correct? Is that what I understand? I don't know, I haven't spoken to anyone at Merritt,
I have no information about what their current lease situation is.
because it feels urgent, but not on our end.
It feels urgent on our end only because if we have the responsibility to put indoors, facilitate curtains in gymnasiums, moving tech labs, moving all teachers from the 6th grade wing.
Absolutely, that's very,
That is a burden on us for our time, and I can't justify, or I don't think it's fair on our staff to find out 2 weeks before the last day of school. And I've done that before. That's been kind of pushed in a previous district. That's really uncomfortable.
sure.
It is the second week of March. I don't want to be having this conversation the last week in May.
But it feels like it's precipitated on the Merritt's need,
Correct.
not on the district's assessment of its facilities and what we, like, I mean, we saw the presentation. Well, I didn't see it. I heard it last week or so 2 weeks ago when I called in, but it was like, yeah, the numbers were there. I mean, it's not like it doesn't make sense that, we have a need to assess the facilities. That's why we hired the consultants to do that for us. Now this has been added, actually at the same meeting as the consultants, which put this pressure and urgency on the district that wasn't there before. And I'm just curious why we would assume that urgency and that pressure if we don't even know what Merritt's needs are. They just want a space. They're not even contracted with us yet. So I would love it if this were to move forward, that if there was a lease agreement, that there would be a stipulation that if they were not contracted with Woodland Park School District, that they not have that space.
Absolutely noted. And agreed. We would have no obligation legally to provide Merritt a school in their current contract status. It's only as they become a charter school of the Woodland Park School District, we then begin to have that obligation.
And so we have this, I don't feel like we're in a bind as much as just this dynamic where we're holding different things in each hand. Like one is, we definitely have an obligation to the Woodland Park School District. And we want to be good neighbors. And if that means accelerating a process in light of the partnership, like you said, long-term partnership with Merritt Academy, I get that too. But I would say that the weight is on, for me, is on the obligations that we have to the Woodland Park School District. And so I would really want us to do the due diligence of, yeah, I know, Miles, you got your work cut out for you. You guys are definitely got a lot of work to do in this. I don't want to rush it. There's that dynamic then of feeling the pressure to get something in place so that we have enough time to make these changes. I mean, I'll go ahead and say it's a bind. I mean, it feels like it's putting the district in a bind to try to accommodate all of this.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned about that for sure. But I still want to be good neighbors. So we have to exercise some wisdom. And I think one of the things that facilitates wisdom is pace. We don't have a lot of time, but I would say let's use our time wisely. So those are my thoughts. I appreciate the willingness to try to find a creative solution where no one is displaced in this district. That's a high value that I think we need to maintain. And I also appreciate the sentiment that even at a comfort level, like there are ways that facilities can really help enhance education, and then there are restrictions within facility that can take away from the learning experience of our students. And I don't want to do anything that would take away the learning experience of our students when it comes to the facilities that we use. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on Chris there? And I understand where he's coming from on this. And maybe we're just going to agree to disagree on some point. But those kids are all in the Woodland Park School District at Merritt. They all live in the Woodland Park School District. It is a public school, and a charter school, we do have legal obligation to it, and that is coming down the pike. We were elected to serve the community of the Woodland Park School District, and that includes all children, not just the ones enrolled at our traditional schools. And maybe we just don't see it that way, but that's how I see it. They are all taxpayers. They are all kids entitled to the same education, and they are all part of the Woodland Park School District. I do not see second-class citizens between the children at Gateway, Columbine, Summit, middle school to high school, and Merritt Academy, and I will never see it that way. And one of the things, Dr. Neal, you were saying, if I understand you, there is a bit of an urgency because there is a master facilities plan that is working forward. And it would mess up the work of that plan if they conclude in June and we're also deciding, hey, we have this obligation to make space available, notice of space available to the charter school, and suddenly, well, hey, we're having to do that, and that means that there's a situation where we would be taking these kids into the middle school, but we've wasted our time then on a master facilities plan that doesn't account for that changing reality. So I applaud you for having the foresight to see that this is something that actually does need to get solved to fit within the overall master facilities plan that is going to be continuing its work for several months. Thank you.
I do think there's a juxtaposition against time versus planning, and that's really what we're up against. This board could come to a conclusion before they needed to sign a lease that this is too fast, and they could delay. But then the Merritt school, the Merritt charter, the district Merritt charter school at that point would have been approved, and that also puts us in a big kind of a dichotomy of challenges. So there's lots here. I would propose in a work session to come back in 2 to 4 weeks. Once we have a lease agreement that's ready, that we have components of figuring out who pays for snow removal, who pays for technology, what is the cost to the district for adding doors and separations into the building and getting a little further down this road. The main point of tonight is to let the board know we have received a charter application from Merritt, and some of the details about that not being connected to their contract. I don't know that further questions tonight, unless somebody has a driving direction to give us caution. Hey, Miles and Matthew, don't do this, or don't, I'm trying to get board feedback on this. Otherwise, we're going to keep moving forward until the board has to make a legal decision to sign a contract, sign a lease with them, and technically sign a contract.
Well, I thank you for the work that you've done so far. I mean, I'm not surprising anybody by saying that's my position based on the questions I've already asked. But I do want to say that work session and that there was a group of people who came in, had their presentation, and they were pushing hard for Columbine. And we got a lot of feedback on that. And it was, from my perspective, I really kind of enjoyed to see the Columbine pride that manifested itself. I know all of us got like a lot of emails. And I don't know, I mean, it was a great thing to see that community school pride. And we got a lot of emails about people talking about just how wonderful that school was and how much they love having their kids there. And so it's very understandable to hear them have a concern that something, why would you fix what isn't broken?
I think we can do better than for all parties involved than that solution.
Yeah. So I really appreciated sort of the way you took this challenge on and kind of came up preliminarily with something you thought would serve the community, both the incoming charter school and all our parents and families already here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board on this topic? Mr. Barretto, I'm sorry, I don't know. I think the mics kind of go silent after a while.
Just from a global perspective, from a taxpayer's point of view, how long has it been that we had an underutilization of resources in the school district? 5 years?
I think, and you're looking to the two new guys here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Miles has been here a while as a teacher, but there was a discussion in 2012. There was also a discussion in 2015. In those two scenarios, there was not an action.
Well, do we have an obligation to the taxpayer to make sure that those facilities are fully utilized?
And that's why we're doing the facility master planning process.
Okay.
I believe that we will
Then my
have.
question, maybe an unfair question to Chris over here, because you've only been on 2 months, the last board, but are you aware of what plan that the other board had to be able to fully utilize resources?
No, I wasn't on any of the facility committees, and there was nothing presented to us in the way of a plan.
That was a little bit more of a Matthew Neal edition this year in October. Further questions or talking?
Any other
points?
questions? Thank you, Miles and Dr. Neal. It's a lot of work and
Did that
really
answer?
appreciate it.
I just want to make sure
Thank you.
Gary
I'm
got.
fine.
Okay, yes, sir.
Okay. Number 7, 8. Board
Miles.
executive expectations.
Thank you, Miles, very much. Yeah, you can give Miles a hand. I don't think he's slept in 2 weeks, so I will continue to defend my leaders because he's put a lot of time in.
Is it on? I'm just going to take this.
I just need to ask, and I hate to interrupt Tina, but does anybody need a 5-minute recess real quick? Let's take it.
That'll help us get the projector up and running too. Thanks.
They're all going to leave now.
You know what? I'll stay.
Huh?
I'll stay.
Thanks. Should I tell them that?
Keurig is pretty fast, right? You need to get this Twinings buttermilk tea that they got over at the store. That's the good stuff.
For those of you that leave, I won't be offended. You're just going to miss some awesome data.
That was awesome. Thank you. Not a lot of them are actually here to listen to us. More than half. I think about 60-40.
And I don't know if my thing is, I've done what I'm going to do with mine. I'm done. I just don't know if this is the end of it. Are they still going to come after me?
They got their hands full.
Yeah, and then
I know, yeah. what I
Yeah,
mean.
it's gonna-
But you think this may have put a cap on it? Neil didn't do what I asked him. He said my heart was in it. I told him to tell them that he heard nothing but he didn't say that. See, this is what I mean. He tells me one thing. He told me that he would say.
So can I text him? Was it?
I mean, really.
I think we gotta roll
Yeah, we gotta roll.
and then
We're making that.
And then make a real change. And we'll start with that. I mean, that upsets me when a guy tells you one thing.
yeah.
And then he waters it down. And I don't even know what he said would really impact at all.
Pretty gooey.
He's sneezing.
So, yeah. I'm sorry we're stuck with it for a little bit. I'm sorry we're stuck.
Zero down and go up the ramp. It's just off the top.
I'll stick on as long as I can. I just stick on. This clears up and nobody's out. I'm fine. But if it keeps coming up, you have to do somebody else.
Well, I gave him some raw meat.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, there we go. Now it's going. You know what's going to be off? He put slides at the front of this, and so all the numbering's going to be off. Oh, no. Miles. Miles Tuttle to the front. Oh, never mind. It worked. It worked. I noticed I'm like, all the slide numbers are going to be off. No, I fixed it.
They're marked.
I know, so that we can start.
So past this first part, yeah.
Where's it at? EE1?
Uh-huh. And then if you go a couple pages in, then we'll just turn them.
Look here. I gave Miles a radio today. He's tethered down.
Probably good. I was like, I'm going to open everybody's slides. Miles added slides and it changed the numbers. So I read.
Oh, it's probably us up here. We're talking about now.
I need like gum or, do you have gum or?
Yeah.
Oh, it's like delayed. Get my back. Well, I'm gonna stand up there. I'm gonna take the mic out. I'm gonna anyway, because I don't need to be here. Yeah.
Well, something else is making you up, so you might as well drink the coffee.
I can look at it connects remotely and I can type
Yes. I was like, that's funny. We all started laughing.
Oh, my car didn't start, so I had to do it remotely and like jump on and I was like set up on my bed, started taking notes, and I was like, oh my God.
We were all giggling. Should I play Bell? Can I do this?
No, we're ready. While somebody outside.
I was gonna play a little bell. Give a
Or
bell.
maybe I should, yeah.
Where's it's on my.
I think like tell them 1 minute or something. You okay? Oh, yeah, we're good. Yep. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely.
What's the? I need like a bell. Is that a good one?
So again, chimes. The radar one. That one's
Yeah,
irritating, yeah. Niels did not say what I asked him to say.
Mike's back on?
I wanted to say what I said. I wanted
Test.
Okay, let's call the meeting back to order. And Tina Cassens is going to start right now.
Thank you to all back. Sorry,
Walk around
I'm not
and
supposed to do that.
The stand-up comedy thing, okay?
Yeah. Dell was telling me to do a little dance, so. So I am here to talk about our executive expectation number one, because really it's our primary.
You want to say that again? It's
Yes.
our number one
It's number
executive
one.
expectation.
Yes. And so I'm not going to hurry. I'm going to tell you all about it in a timely manner. So I want to talk about academic achievement. And so you should have, we went around and opened all the binders to the presentation. And basically, if you look at the executive expectation, I'm going to highlight the last sentence there, that it said it's our obligation to ensure students are prepared academically at each level to become productive, responsible, and successful citizens. So my goal is to talk a little bit about the school and district performance frameworks, because that at the highest level is really our big bar that the state looks at and gives a rating to each school. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but some of the key to that is that we've been on a hiatus from that for 2 years. So that's a little bit of old data. So I'm going to sprinkle in some new data with that, but then I'm really going to spend some time talking about our current scores. So the scores that we've had from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year, because over the last 2 years, we've had a lot of interruptions to our assessment data. So I want to start by talking a little about the district and school performance frameworks, which is a report we received from the state. So if you flip, I'm on slide 4, has some little circles there that talk about how performance is measured. So when the state assigns a rating to us, they really look at some different performance measures. At elementary and middle school, they look at academic achievement and academic growth.
Members of the press, I see you taking pictures. You're welcome to receive this in digital form if you would wish at editing point. It's going to be
We'll send it.
fairly extensive, and happy to send it to you this evening for you to produce whatever media is necessary. Sorry, Tina, one more thing. Board this presentation to divide it into 3 components. Number 1 is defining performance, what it looks like and what it is. Number 2, looking at history back to the last time we were tested in the past, 2019. And then number 3, correct me if I'm wrong, Tina, but really looking at this year's performance.
Yep.
Okay, so the 3 components. What is it? Where were we? Where are we? Sorry, ma'am.
So looking at how our performance is measured. So interestingly, I like to compare this. So in my eyes, I'm a runner and I run races. So I train, I run races, and I receive achievement in my races, but I also receive growth. So I race against other people, and sometimes I place in a certain place in a race. But a lot of times that's based on my fitness, my age, my genetics. So it's based on my training. So I receive a place, but I also run against growth. So I run against a better time every time I run in the same race. I run against sometimes the same people. So I notice the same people in the race around me, and we race against each other. And my goal is to beat those like 5 people that I'm always running with. And that's really what the growth side is looking at, is a race against yourself or against people that are similarly compared to you. So when you look at how we're scored, we look at academic achievement. And for the state performance framework, that is based off of CMAS and PSAT, SAT, and our access, which is for our English language learners. So at the elementary and middle school, it's primarily our CMAS test, which is going to happen next month. So when you don't see us and we're doing lots, we're giving the CMAS test. It takes a lot of our energies. They also break those scores down to what they call all students and at-risk students. There are populations that historically are more at risk, and so they look at those achievement scores to see how those groups are doing. At the state level, that includes English language learners, free and reduced lunch, minority students, and students with disabilities. So they break down and look at the achievement scores of those populations. That is all factored into achievement at 40%. And then they look at growth. So they look at how does a group do compared to, basically the state puts them in a little cohort. They take the test last year and they say, all of you performed about the same. So we're going to watch and see how you do next year. And then we're going to put you on a bell curve, is basically what they look at. And, the 50th percentile is going to be, you were right there with everyone else that was with you last year. And then they
Testing.
I always have to borrow your mic, don't I? So they look at that growth on CMAS. So again, we're on CMAS. And they look at those all students. And again, they look at breaking down the at-risk groups, which again include those same populations. When we get to high school, they include the same thing, looking at the PSAT, the SAT, and the Access, which is for our English language learners. They look at growth, so same idea with growth. And then high school adds a category called post-secondary readiness, and they look at our graduation rate, our dropout rate, our SAT scores, and matriculation, so where our kids go after they leave high school, if they go to a 2 or 4 year college, or if they go to a career tech ed program. And so we receive scores based on all of those. You can see high school then divides that into 30%, 40%, and 30%. So this is how they figure the school performance framework within our schools. So when you look at the district is what we call accredited. We have received, often you hear it's called a green score. So we are accredited, which means that we meet the majority of all of those factors. If you look at some of our region schools, you'll see when you talk about turnaround schools, those are schools that the state is looking to turn around or take over. So you have a school like Adams 14, which I know we've talked about, a priority improvement school like Montezuma Cortez, and then you get to schools in our region, some improvement schools, Cripple Creek, Colorado Springs District 11, accredited, Manitou, and Elizabeth. I know not local, but we often compare our schools to Elizabeth because they share a lot of similar traits to us. And then distinction schools in the area, we have Academy District 20 and Cheyenne Mountain. So just to give a perspective of the different schools at each level. So if you were to look at some comparisons, and sometimes what you have to think about with comparisons is, if you remember, I talked about those at-risk groups. If you don't have enough students in an at-risk group, it doesn't get factored into the school performance framework. You have to have a certain minimal, what they call N. And so if I'm looking at students that have IEPs or disabilities, if I don't reach a certain minimum of those in my school, then it doesn't get factored into the school performance framework. And so sometimes that can make scores look a little different because that's an at-risk population, a population that doesn't always have the highest scores for us. So sometimes when we say we're going to compare to different schools, we have to remember that some schools don't have those at-risk groups in their scores. And so the comparison is not quite apples to apples. So if you look at some comparisons, starting with our elementary, so remember, we've been on a 2-year hiatus for school performance framework because we did not test as the state test in 2020, first year of the pandemic, we did not test. Second year of the pandemic, we greatly reduced. We only tested half the grade levels. So we were on a break from that. So we're looking at scores from 2019, 2018, and 2017. The bar you see, the vertical bar you see is what the state has said you need to reach accredited or performance status. So if you look at our elementaries, we've been consistently above that. If you compare to some of our neighbors, here's Manitou's elementary scores over the last 3 years. So when you combine both, our school combines all 3 of our elementaries. Manitou combines UPass and Manitou Elementary.
Why would you pick these three schools to compare to?
I just picked the ones that were our neighboring districts. So we talk about choice, and if kids are wanting to choose, they're going to go to a neighboring district. So these are all districts kind of touching our boundaries.
So no disrespect to any of those other districts. It's just kind of how we compare.
Mm-hmm. Yep, 60.9. I can hear you. I'll repeat it.
60.9%. Is that an average of all our students?
So no, yes. So what happens is the state does all that math on all the different components that go into the framework, and we get a percentage score. So we earned 60.9% of the points. That is for all three: Columbine, Gateway, and yep. Mm-hmm. We had a school on that line. So we had a school that was 0.6% off of the green performance level.
Tina, can you go back one slide to the what overall ratings are assigned? This slide, Gary, you'll see we talked a little bit as a district about Adams 14. They're on turnaround. They're a state mandated turnaround, the red category. So what you're asking is a specific school in our district? Yes, they were in 2019. Again, 2 years ago, last time tested at a 0.6 or 0.06%.
0.6%.
Right. So yeah. So they were kind of stuck on the line between improvement and accredited. They ended up in the improvement category, but not so much as to pull our overall district out of the green into yellow. Now, later on this evening, we'll look at the actual scores of that school since then. And honestly, they're not going to be that place this next round because they've actually moved. They actually will pull up the rest of the district because they've done some really good things.
And some of the things we see even in our own schools is some of our elementary schools report on those at-risk factors and some don't. And there are some years that one school will report and then the next year they won't report on those at-risk factors. And we've seen swings as much as 20% when we remove some of those at-risk populations.
Wow.
Ms. Cassens, the vertical orange line, is that's the cutoff between like accredited and needs improvement?
Yeah, and what happens is you saw those scores. These were district scores. When we talk about schools, it's called performance and improvement. And there is no actual distinction for a school. There's only distinction for a district.
So at the 60.9, we're in the green box. What is the number that you hit that puts you into the distinction blue box?
73.
Schools don't get distinction. What puts?
Okay.
I think it's 73, 75.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I think it's 75 or 6 because we had a school that was at 73.
it's pretty.
So if all of our schools were averaging
Right, the
like
spread,
75.
the distance, and you look back, sorry, Tina, one more slide back. That's also why the reason why, one more, that you only see D20 and Cheyenne Mountain up in that distinction category. That's a pretty good lead. And oftentimes, as back to what Tina was saying, it's very difficult for a district that has certain demographics, socioeconomic or free reduced lunch, high needs populations. You have to be very dedicated to closing that achievement gap for those disadvantaged populations of students in order to make into distinction. So here's another example. I had a fully gifted and talented school in Denver Public that was always in blue because they were scoring in the 99th percentile, right? And so there were GT students, there was 386 of them. It was a GT magnet school. They didn't worry about being in distinction. They just worry about growing their kids 0.5 or 1/4%. They were so high up in the performance status, it was really hard for them to close the achievement gap. Adams 14, down in turnaround, be careful what I say here, they have a lot of opportunity to close that achievement gap in a lot of different ways. And for 12 years, they have not been able to do so.
And it's kind of like I said with my race, I can train and train and train and train and hire trainers. If I go to the Olympic trials, I'm not going to come in very
Right,
high.
and I'm not trying to suggest anything about the number. I'm just trying to understand
Yeah.
the meaning of the number and
Yes.
where you're crossing over
It's-
one way or the other.
I mean, it's almost inappropriate to compare the Woodland Park School District to another district that does not have the same demographics. And so that's where we struggle as a community, is figuring out, where do we fit? Right? I mean, how do we compare to another district that might be much more affluent? So another, well, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you see here Manitou Springs Elementary Schools, you see Cripple Creek Elementary School, and you see D11, and what I took was the west side of D11. So the elementary schools that fall on the west side of D11, because D11 is very diverse when you get into the whole city. So as you can see, our elementary schools actually are quite holding their ground with our neighbors. When we go to our middle school, you see the middle school consistently outperforming that bar. And if you compare, here's Manitou Springs Middle School. Here's Cripple Creek Junior High. And here's Holmes D11. And often we've been to Holmes a lot to see what they're doing, because they tend to be our kind of our competition. We like to go down, we share some demographics with them, and we've been down to visit them and see what they do and take things and things like that. If you look at our high school, here's our high school. And remember, the high school adds that third category of post-secondary readiness, graduation rate, dropout rate, matriculation, SAT scores. Here we have Manitou. They do not have some of those at-risk populations in here, so their scores look a little different. Here we have Cripple Creek. And here we have Coronado, again connected to Holmes. So we often like to look and see what they're doing also. Much bigger school than us, though.
Do we have an idea, I mean, I'd like to later on, we get into the areas like Woodland Park High School, get close to improvement?
Yep, I'm going to show you what that looks like.
What areas in that improvement area that they need to improve? And do you look at that figure go up?
It does, and what I'm going to show you is some of their PSAT, SAT scores, which we show we're closing the gap on the state, which means that this score would go up. So this is basically that high-level look at school and district performance frameworks. So what I want to talk you through a little bit is I want to talk about the scores that are behind that and some of the trends, but I'm going to go pretty fast because these are older scores. So I'm going to give you the high-level kind of what we've seen. When you look at our performance frameworks and our scores, we see that overall, our students meet expectations in English and evidence-based reading and writing. We see that the middle school trends above the state, and we see that the key factor to that is that they're addressing the needs of free and reduced lunch kids. And an interesting thing is you don't know who the free and reduced lunch kids are, but they are a demographic we have to increase. So in general, we put strategies in place for all kids, and what we find is that raises the whole group. And we also see that the high school is closing the gap. We've had a gap and we're closing it. Some areas for growth that we see at the elementary, and you're going to hear this on both achievement and growth, we kept kids in school, but our elementary did a lot of hybrid and quarantines and some programming that probably we would have been better to choose one. We would have been better to just be remote for a while instead of dealing with in and out with our elementary. It was a hard population to go in and out. It was hard for kids. And so we saw some effects on scores. Elementary math is an area that we need to focus on. We need to focus on achievement for students with disabilities. We need to focus on achievement for free and reduced lunch at elementary and high school. And we need some additional data because we had limited data during the pandemic. So there was one day in April that this data is all based on, actually about 3 a week in April. So I'm going to show you some quick looks at these graphs. So if you flip, I'm on page 13. This is CMAS scores for our elementary and English language arts. And you can see 2017, 2018, 2019, and then you see a big hole because we didn't test in 2020, and then you see 2021. And 2021 is only 3rd and 5th grade. 4th grade did not take ELA. So you see that we have a downward trend that we need to be tracking on. If you look at math, you see again, we're kind of that reddish bar, but this is only fourth grade. So we didn't test third and fifth in math. So we said we need to really look at our math and our math curriculum and what we're doing in elementary. If you look at middle school, you'll see.
Tina, I'm going to pause you there for just a second. Sorry. So again, you're working on that math curriculum now. So we're not waiting on other curriculum discussions. We can look at the data from last year, coming into this year, knowing that as we head into next year, we need to do some things differently.
Yep.
At elementary math level. Okay.
English language arts, I'm on page 15, slide 15. You'll see the middle school is the red line. We're trending above the state consistently. Again, this is only 7th grade that tested, but they held steady above the state. If you go to middle school math, you'll see that, again, we're trending with the state. Here's an interesting thing, though. The 8th grade exceeded the state by 7.8 points. So the 8th grade was 7. So if you look, that scale there is by every 10. So take that score and take it up 7 more, almost 8 more points. Our 8th grade did amazing last year on the CMAS test.
And Tina, when you say the state, what schools are included in the state? Are we talking
The whole state.
All the public schools? Okay.
Yep.
Excellent.
And charter schools, everyone that's required to test for the state.
Excellent.
Every public school.
Yep. And charter school. Yep. High school takes the PSAT and SAT, so college-bound tests. So it's interesting, the test really changes when you get to high school, and the rigor takes on a different idea because now you're talking a college-bound test. And if you look at our evidence-based reading and writing, so that's what it changes to, you'll see that our high school is making gains on the state. So we've been tracking with the state, but if you look at last year, we get closer to the state significantly last year for 9th, 10th, and 11th. And if you look at 9th grade exceeded the state 9th grade by 14.4 points. So 9th grade did an amazing job in evidence-based reading and writing.
Tina
And-
I'm sorry.
No, good.
Was there one grade that was significantly below?
10th and 11th were below, but they were making gains moving forward.
Okay.
But 9th grade they knocked it out of the park and probably resulted in a lot of that catch on the gap.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. And you're going to see later that we have some scores that show our transition from 8th to 9th grade is very solid. We don't see the dips that other schools do. So that's something that we're proud of because typically when kids change schools, they go down. When you look at high school math, you'll also see that we were trending with the state quite a bit below, and we made huge gains. And remember, this is over 2 years because there's that blank part there. We made growth to catch up to start to catch up with the state.
So truly phenomenal trend.
Yeah.
If you look at that closing gap, that's what you'd want to see to substantially close gaps. Some of the previous slides are amazing. All I'm saying is don't mess with the math teachers because they're kind of kicking it. They're doing a great job. It's like, so yeah, it's kind of like, don't mess with the math teachers because they're getting it done. So, and maybe it's because they understand the numbers better, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yep. It's a 3, so 9, 10, and 11. 12th grade doesn't test. So 9, 10, and 11. Well, we have 11th graders. We have calculus, calc AB, stats. Probably algebra 2, because it's for the SAT. Probably a little bit higher for kids that are going to score higher, because we have 11th graders in pre-calc, calc, honors calc, stats. No, it's the SAT. So the SAT does start to ask some questions at that higher level because they're trying to get those kids that are going to score like 34 or 35 on the SAT.
So Tina, just real
Or on the
quick,
ACT.
to re-illustrate for the board, we have a very good chance this year if we continue that trend of bypassing the state. And so that would be a pretty large celebration for us.
Huge.
Besides just celebrating the math, because if you look at the last two slides, if we continue that trajectory or you see that trend line is closing, it wouldn't take a lot for us to nudge across that finish line above the state.
Good.
And Tina, do you have a sense, because this is only going back to 2018, but I know your experience goes back even further. Do you have a sense of how we've been doing even longer trend? Have we always been sort of trailing the state, or did we used to be above? I mean, this goal of exceeding them, is this a goal long awaited?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
For when we wrote the strategic plan, we have a few people in here that did that. Our goal was to meet and then exceed the state. So what you saw at the middle school was an achievement of that goal. When we showed that they were above the state in both areas, that was not where we stood when we wrote our strategic plan back, 5-6 years ago. We were below the state, sometimes sat around the state, and our goal was to get over the state.
Which is accomplished at the middle school,
Mm-hmm.
working on at the high school.
Yep.
Thank you, math teachers.
Yep.
And is there any particular grade that you're wanting to call out for far exceeding expectations on this one as well?
And the math, no, it was interesting because it was all three that made those gains.
Okay.
So that's an attestament to some programming changes and some attention that the math teachers played to changing some curriculum at the high school level.
Yeah,
And so
and
it raised the bar for everyone.
I was wondering what you would attribute to that sort of big gain from 2019.
And that was probably around the shift to integrated math. We used to teach algebra, geometry, algebra, and we shifted to a programming that teaches, because algebra and geometry relate, so we teach integrated math. So we teach basic we start at the level of algebra and geometry, then we go to the next level of algebra geometry, and then we go to the third level. So we teach them in conjunction. And I think for kids, it leads to greater relevance. And because, you always hear kids say, I was good at algebra, but not good at geometry, or I was great at geometry, but not good at algebra. This provides that opportunity for those to be integrated.
I'm going to speak to one thing here, members of the board. The fact that Tina can answer that question, I don't know a lot of chief academic officers that would know the history on that kind of stuff to be able to paint that history. So thank you.
Well,
Helps to have a math degree.
I'll give her a hand.
she is a veteran of briefings, so
She kind of knows where all the speed bumps were. So
So now we're going to move to the other side of the house, which is growth. And so we're still in that SBF, which is a little bit older. So when you look at growth, here are some trends we saw. So remember, this is when I get to compare to people that are like me, and I want to grow more than people like me. That's our goal. That's our hope. But really, the averages say I'll grow like people like me because it's bell curve. But what we've seen is all growth sub-indicators, so all those little groups we talked about, they are approaching or meeting expectations at elementary and middle school. Middle school meets growth for students with disabilities in both English and math, as well as free and reduced lunch in math. That's a good bar to meet it with those groups. High school is closing the gap, so you're going to hear that again. Areas for growth, again, that pandemic effect for our elementary. We now have middle school kids above the state, and you teach differently then. And so we've got to remember, we got to raise expectations because our kids have higher skills now. And so sometimes we've taught kind of in that middle for a while. We got to up our game. And so we've got to move that up. We've got to look at growth for free and reduced lunch. You heard this on the last slide, achievement, but we also got to do growth at elementary and high school, and we need more data. So let me give you a quick rundown. Here's language arts for elementary. This is only 5th grade because they look at their 4th grade test. Actually, in this case, they had to look at their 3rd grade test as compared to their 5th grade test. Because remember, we had a blank year in there. And so if you look at 2021, that's 3rd to 5th grade. So you'll see that we had a decline there. If we didn't have math at middle school, because our 4th graders had never taken a test. They would have been in 2nd grade last time we took the test. So they didn't have a growth score. So let's go to the middle school. If you look at middle school, only 7th grade, you'll see that we started to trend with the state. And that was that idea that now they're higher, we have to teach higher. And so they didn't grow as much as we had experienced before. If you look at middle school math, you'll see an interesting thing. The pandemic hurt math more than it did English language arts at the state level. And you'll see that the state takes quite a turn, but you'll see that we didn't take quite a turn. And you'll actually see this was the most amazing result. Our 8th grade kids exceeded the state growth percentile by almost 20 percentile points. So that was huge. Our 8th grade math last year knocked it out of the park. So if you look at high school, when we look at growth at high school, we really track a class. So this is our current senior class. This is how they tested in 9th grade, and then 10th grade, and then 11th grade, because it's all about the SAT test. So there's a comparison. The bar at the top is the state, and the red bar's us. So you can see we made gains on the state with that class. Almost reached them, 2 points to reach the state. If you look at math, you'll see here too, you'll see how they grew from 9th to 10th to 11th and where they ended up. So we had growth with the high school kids. So let's switch now to, this is all older data. So we're tracking on kids now. We needed to know, we had interruptions to learning last year, so we need to know how they've done from the beginning of the year to now. So if you look at some of our scores, this is an interesting thing to know. This graph shows kindergartners and 1st graders that are entering school in August below benchmark in reading. If you look, we have gone in the last 4 years from about 41% of our kids entering below benchmark to 64.5% of our kids entering below benchmark. That changes the game. So we have a lot of getting kids going at kindergarten and 1st grade that we need to look at. Almost a quarter more are coming in below enter benchmark. So we have to look at that. So let's look at our kindergarten and 1st grade. They give a test called the Dibbles test. We have BOE is called beginning of the year. MOY is middle of the year. So what you'll see here, and if you look at this screen, I've kind of isolated it for you. If you look, here is where our kindergartners came in that are red. That means they're significantly below. Here's where they are now at mid-year. So we have cut that line in half. We've gone from 42% being significantly below to 18% being significantly below in a half a year.
So members of the board, as you look at these next set of slides, Tina's done it for the audience where she's only looking at the red category. The next category you would see would be the, what is it? Sorry.
Green and blue.
Green and blue. So if you look on the TV screen, what you want to see is that the top at the beginning of the year, the red, becomes less red, and then you're going to see more blue on the total other end of the spectrum. Now, since you're looking at your photocopy that's in color, you're going to have to really train your eye to see, is the blue increasing and is the red decreasing from the beginning of the year to now? So,
And if you look up here, you'll
Tina's
see
done it kind of on the slide up here, and she's just done that for a talking point, but really you're trying to get categories to grow at the top end, categories to shrink at the bottom end.
So if you look at the top end, then here is the kids that are proficient in kindergarten, and here they are mid-year. So we have almost doubled the percent that are proficient in reading. If you look at first grade,
I'll clap to that.
yeah. If you look at first grade, not quite the extent, but you can see that we're making gains on the number that are proficient.
And Tina, do you guys have a metric as to like certain numbers that you're wanting to hit? Like, okay, we're starting out with 40% read. That number's got to be by 20%, or is it simply well, we want to see the right stuff increasing and
Each principal and each school has a unified improvement plan. So their UIP must be submitted to the state in the spring, and principals' goals have to be submitted to me in alignment with their performance evaluation as well.
And if you ask our elementary, they don't want any red.
I mean, there's dream goals, but
Yeah.
there's also the reality of what we're required to submit to the state as far as not just goals, but a plan of how we plan to get there.
No, there's a great positive shift. Is obviously everything is going in the right direction in this slideshow.
So far, we have areas to improve.
Are we meeting our own internal expectations and goals like that we've submitted?
We are pacing in the right way.
Okay.
We won't, I mean, really, I'm not casting judgment on anybody until, and that's not even judgment, but it's
Middle.
as we begin to look at our UIP plan for next year, did we make what we're said we're going to make?
Yeah,
We're trending in the right direction.
yeah.
And I will tell you, kindergarten definitely did.
Mhm.
That was a huge gain for them. I would say first grade probably is trending where they wanted to be. They probably wanted to be a little farther, knowing that we're dealing with some of the effects of the pandemic too. We want kids to grow more.
Sure.
If you look then at the intermediate, so this is our second and third. So if you look up here again, it's red bar to red bar, red bar to red bar. So you can see our second grade reading has 33% that were in that urgent category, and they've got that down to 19. So third is 28 to 22. And then if you look at the top of that one, theoretically, oh, there it goes. It jumped. If you look at the top, you can see again that the green and blue are getting bigger. So our kids that are proficient. If we jump to middle school, and let me explain this one a little. This is 4th through 9th grade. We take what's called the MAP test. And MAP is a test that's a smart test, so it adjusts to kids. They can go as high as they need to. It kind of asks them questions and figures out where they're at. So everyone's test is different. What I'm showing you here is this is what should be the national growth. So in a non-pandemic year, a 4th grader from the beginning of the year to the end of the year should increase their score by 8 points, 8.16. So last year, our 4th grade increased by 5.73 during the pandemic. So it's just a fact we're dealing with. But if you look at this year's 4th grade, they've pretty much already made the year's growth they needed to at mid-year. So huge gains for 4th grade.
So so if we're at mid-year, where could we maybe hope to hit by end of year?
I hope 16 points.
Okay.
Mhm.
Excellent.
Which would be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
If you look at 5th and 6th grade, same idea. They should have made, so look at this interesting trend. They should have made the blue bar, and look at during the pandemic, 5th and 6th grade did make the blue bar during a pandemic. And if you look at their trend, 4.5 doubled is going to put me at about 9. 2.7 doubled is going to put me over that 5.19. So we're on track to make the growth that they need to make. If you look at 7th grade and 8th grade, and as they get older, they make less growth on this test. They should make 4 and 3, and you'll see that we didn't quite make that with them last year. Interesting though, remember those were high kids. So we didn't push our high kids to keep going. Right now, we have something that we're looking at right here. 7th grade's not even registering. They're scoring the same as they did at the beginning of the year. And so we have the middle school going, what's happening? And you're going to see in a minute that that's also in math. So we have probably some pandemic effects we're working through with our 7th graders because they came from 5th grade, had a crazy 6th grade year, and now they're in the middle of 7th grade and they didn't get that 6th grade transition. So we've got to put some attention on our 7th graders. You'll see though our 8th graders are well on track to make the growth they need to make. The last thing I provided for you with reading is when you look at the map, it's meant to grow from 6th through 10th grade. What I did was average out our growth over the last 5 years on map. We're the green bar, and that's kind of how we trend as kids grow. The national norm is the black bar, and you'll notice they bounce a little because of the summer effect, and we don't bounce quite as much. But you will also notice this lovely position right here at 9th grade. If you look here, our best gap is 9th grade. The nation drops when kids go to high school and transition to 9th grade. We keep growing. So that's an amazing thing, a tribute to our middle school, high school. One thing though we've got to look at is the 10th starts to grow and we start to flatline. So we got to figure out how do we keep pushing those 10th graders when they get up there. If we switch to math, so I'm on page 33, same idea. STAR looks at math. So if you look, our 1st grade, this was another amazing thing. 14.7 kids were urgent in math, and it's hardly registered. 1.7% are at mid-year. So we've almost eliminated the urgent kids in 1st grade math. And if you've been in any of our 1st grade classrooms, they are amazing classrooms to visit. They're going. It's like, wow. And if you look at this, take a look at this. Look at the green and blue bars. Look at the growth. They have almost doubled the percent of 1st graders that are proficient in math. So huge. If you look at our intermediate, I'll go a little faster. You can see the red bars up here, getting smaller, not quite as extreme. Our proficiency bars getting bigger. So we're making solid gains at that 2nd and 3rd grade level.
We don't see any areas of concern in what you're seeing here tonight in that category.
If we go back to map, so remember here, the blue bar is what they should grow in a year. So our 4th grade should have grown almost 11 points. They grew 9 during the pandemic. This year, they're at 7.5. So very much on track to exceed that growth. If you look at 5th and 6th grade, so look here again at 5th and 6th grade, last year they made the growth they needed to in MAP. And they're very much on track to make that this year. Here comes 7th grade. If you look at 7th grade, they made it last year. They're closer in this one. 3.1 would give us 6.2, close to the growth, but we need to make more with them. And then here's our 8th grade. 8th grade has already made their growth this year in 8th grade math. And remember, they rocked it last year too. So
again, for the board to see, we have a continuing discussion about 7th grade.
Mm-hmm. Which tends to mean it's probably a kid thing we need to work on versus a curriculum thing.
A cohort challenge,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
A grouping of students.
Yep. Because it's hard to miss that first year of middle school in a way that you transition into the middle school. So here's that map trend. If you look, we're the green bar. Over the last 5 years, we tend to start below the national average. And by high school, we're above it. And look at that 9th grade gap again. So in both reading and math, we have a wonderful transition between 8th and 9th grade. Our kids keep growing. Again, our 10th grade, we got to keep pushing. So here's the last part I have. What are we focusing on this year? Because we've seen these scores. So we're focusing on targeted interventions. So we've got to find those kids that are below and we got to get them above. So we're working one-on-one with those. You heard about a mentoring experience. That's where that's happening. We are shifting our preschool program. Remember that number that showed kids weren't ready to come in? We put our preschool into one place and built the early childhood center, and we're working to enhance the programming as well as the access to that. So we're working to grow it. We're working to provide better programming by bringing them to one location. And I was bummed to hear not room because we've had open spaces. So we're going to have to figure out where that disconnect was with someone that needed in preschool, because we still have open spaces. And we've told people we will open spaces if we need to. We've also started providing some before and after school programming so that for families that need that for preschool, we are available like a regular preschool would be before and after school. There we go. The projector went out. You all won't see what we're doing. We are also implementing a new K-5 literacy program. So last year, the READ Act required that we adopt from programs that were approved by the state. So we went through a curriculum adoption process and introduced into reading. We are also previewing our K-5 math curriculum, so spending time with that. We are holding high expectations for middle and high school students, and sometimes they don't like that. So we're telling them, nope, we know that you can do better, and we're pushing them and holding high expectations. And then we're really enhancing the post-secondary readiness. You asked some of those high school things. Some of our lower scores are in that extra category about post-secondary readiness. We do not meet matriculation scores. It's a red box for us. So we are not getting the percent of our kids to college and career tech ed. And mostly we're not meeting the kids that are going to four-year colleges. And so we have put a ton of energy into programming for K-8 because we know it starts early. So we're doing career programming in K-8 that's starting this year. We are building a career and college readiness center. I would encourage you when you go to the high school, go visit the Career and College Readiness Center. It's like in college when you could go in and see all those opportunities. It's a place for kids to go to look at college. College reps come, they can fill out applications, they can write essays with the ladies that are in there. It is focused on getting kids that post-secondary next step. And those ladies are also hosting, as well as the high school, family programming. So we've had FAFSA nights. So come fill out your financial aid application and we'll walk you through it. We brought up college reps from downtown and they walk parents through filling that out. We've had information about the ASVAB, which is the test for military. We'd have information about career tech. So we're providing evening activities and we feed everybody and they can come in and learn about post-secondary options because we want to increase that post-secondary readiness score for our kids. So I am reporting that I believe we are in compliance with areas for growth noted because we're always striving to do better with executive expectation 1 on student achievement. And I appreciate that everyone listened at 9:30 at night, and now it's much later.
Please, everyone, give Tina a hand.
Okay, we have an expectation form to fill out. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
Was there something else you wanted to say, Dr. Neal?
No, sir.
I don't know if you're.
All right. Do I have a motion to accept the presentation as presented?
I make the motion to accept.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Way ahead.
Mrs. Kelly.
Let's see, I had Roberto as the motion, correct? And Illingworth the second? Okay. Austin,
Aye.
Roberto,
Yes.
Illingworth,
Aye.
Patterson. Aye. Rusterholz.
Aye. Thank you very much, Tina. That was very, very good. And lots of good news. Okay, on to reports. Mr. Superintendent, sir.
I will be very brief.
Thank you.
I will tell you that, inform the board that I've been participating in the University of Colorado's search for their new college Department of Education Dean of the College of Education. It's been an honor for the 3 days that they've interviewed. I've been able to interview kind of in partnership. So this is something that Dell and I were talking about at the beginning of the school year. How do we make a better partnership with the university to be able to provide our teachers with coursework, doctoral programs, master's programs in Woodland Park, kind of a dream of ours to figure out how that would work. I just got a chance to interview the 3 finalists for the Dean of the College of Education and kind of plug in Woodland Park a little bit as not that far from UCCS and, you know, how we can be a better partner and how our teachers can really receive benefit of that partnership. So I was their superintendent designee for their hiring process, and 3 days in a row found some great ways to talk about the stuff that we're doing here in the school district. Other than that, that's kind of the latest and greatest. Thank you.
Any Board of Education member have any final comments?
I do, Mr. President. I do. Dr. Nail and I went 2 weeks ago to the CASB legislation conference. And I was really impressed that they had a panel of students that represented different schools throughout Colorado, all high schoolers, I believe. And I just want to read you something. And I think that would be a good addition to our school, or maybe we have part of this, but these kids were really, really informative. And I just want to read you something, please. It says the students are obviously key stakeholders in education. 7 students joined in the Winter Legislative Conference to discuss how boards and districts can elevate student voice in their school districts and their community. In fact, research shows that engaging students in transforming education system can lead to creative, culturally relevant solutions while also ensuring that students and teachers engage in sustaining solutions. When stating what they thought were the most effective strategies to elevate student voice, a Littleton Public School student emphasized humanizing each other. It was essential in that a lot of students in the school could not name a single board member, which is extremely unfortunate because they are really important, and that relationship between board members and students is really important. So if we build it and grow it with our board members, and board members grow with students, and students will feel comfortable to share the voice and to communicate. All the students emphasized the desire that students should be heard and feel that their opinions are important. As explained by another student from Denver Public Schools, students want to have a seat at the table with a direct role in the decision-making. She has collaborated with administration in a way that is really impactful, and I feel it has made me a better person overall. Student panelists encourage board members to provide students with a clear expectation of how they can get involved and welcome them into their roles. Their authenticity, they were listening to what that we have to say. Creating relationships with mutual respect will pave the way. The students explained various strategies underway in districts across Colorado, such as including student voice on the school boards, holding regular meetings between board members and students, establishing a student advisory committee, and participating in the student leadership strand at CASB's annual convention in December. The Harrison students spoke about what it is like to speak up during board meetings as they officially sit on the Harrison School Board. They attend meetings and contribute to its work, with exceptions of voting. They confirmed positive changes since the board added these student positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, we will move on to I'd like to ask Brad Miller if he would come up and just discuss our move into executive session for the audience. Do you have a motion?
Yes, we do have a motion this evening to move into executive session as specific language associated with that motion.
We do have that. I thought you wanted to talk about it first.
Yeah, so, hi, Brad Miller, I'm a lawyer. All the dark money bought me a new Subaru, and I made it up here safely. What I wanted to make sure that we talk about is that in executive session, we're a newer board. I haven't been a lot in executive session with you. I'm not even positive I have. Maybe I have once. We are not making any decisions. There's nothing that binding that comes out of executive session. And I want to make sure that you are clear on that. We're not going in to make some decision. We're going to talk about some contracts. And then on the back end, you said this well, so I didn't feel I needed to really reiterate this, but we won't be taking action in public meeting on the backside either. We'll adjourn the meeting after executive session.
Thank you, Brad. Do I have a motion to move into executive session? Let me read the whole thing. Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
At this time, I need a motion for us to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-402, 4F, B, and E, to discuss personal matters regarding school and district administrator performance and related matters, to receive legal advice on specific legal matters regarding contract negotiations, to determine positions, and to direct negotiations regarding contract negotiations related to charter contract development, Ute Pass BOCES contract, and conditions of employment documents. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Kelly?
Austin?
Aye.
Barbato?
Yes.
Illingworth?
Aye.
Patterson?
Aye.
Russellson?
Aye.
Mr. President, at this time, I would recommend the invitation of Dale Garrett to the executive session.
Mr.
It
Garrett,
pleases
would
the
you
board.
join us, please? Don't you want to go home? We will be coming back here to adjourn if you'd like to take a nap. That was a joke. You're supposed to laugh a little bit.